Hello everyone. Thanks for tuning in to Tenant Thursdays today. For today's video we will be discussing informal evictions and what they look like, what they are, what landlord retaliation or retaliation is, and what you can do if you experience any of these situations. My name is Alex Escobedo, and I am the Communication and Events Coordinator at the Lawyers Committee for Better Housing, or LCBH for short. With me today is Morgan Schumann. She's a staff attorney here at LCBH and a manager at renovention.com, an online free resource for Chicago renters facing housing issues. Thanks for being with us today, Morgan.
Thanks for having me, Alex, and thanks for doing this.
Definitely, no, thank you. And just to kind of get everything started, what is an informal eviction?
Sure. So, an informal eviction is what might happen if your landlord maybe wants you to leave, but decides instead of to go through the court process like they're really required to do if they're trying to evict a tenant, doing something that tries to force you to otherwise leave outside of the court system. So, this could be anything from directly locking you out, could be shutting off your utilities or doing something like that to try to force you to move, or making the living circumstance uncomfortable for you, anything where the goal is to get you out without landlords having to turn to the formal court process.
Right. And so what options do tenants have if they're experiencing an informal eviction?
Sure. And the options that you have are going to really depend on your individual circumstance. So the first thing I would tell tenants that are facing this situation is I would encourage you to try to talk to an attorney and get some legal advice that's very specific and tailored to your situation, because renters do have a lot of rights, and in Chicago, it's not allowed for a landlord to just lock a tenant out or otherwise force you out of your apartment without going through the formal process. And what that looks like is that if you're behind on rent, or for whatever other reason your landlord wants to terminate your lease, the landlord should have to give you a formal notice that your lease is being terminated. You should have some period of time to respond to that. And then after that happens, and only then can the landlord go and actually file an eviction case. Then you've got a right to due process, and you've got the right to go into court and have your side of the story heard before an eviction order could be entered against you. And even once you go through all of that, and an eviction order is entered, the only person that can actually enforce that eviction order or have you actually removed from the property is the sheriff. And so if your landlord is, saying, look, you have to move out in 3 weeks, or something like that, or anything where they're saying that you have this obligation to give up possession of your apartment, that's not going to be allowed. So if you are experiencing that, first and foremost, talk to an attorney. I would encourage you to go to intervention.com, and you can use that platform to learn a little bit more about your rights and connect with a volunteer attorney that could give you some additional assistance. You might also want to just take a look and review a little bit about the Chicago Residential Landlord Tenant Ordinance. That ordinance has a provision in it that relates to landlords informally evicting tenants. So you can take a look at that to learn more about your rights. But if generally in Chicago, if the landlord locks out a tenant, like we're talking about with an informal eviction, they could potentially be on the hook for damages of up to 2 times your rent amount, or 2 times your actual damages. So that's really powerful for tenants to know. And then if I can just add one more thing, and I think we'll talk about this later with some of your other questions, but informal eviction often goes hand in hand with retaliation. And so if maybe you complained about building conditions and your landlord is upset about that and decides that they are going to retaliate against you and try to force you to move, or something like that, that could be both an informal eviction and a form of retaliation. And both of those are separate things that are kind of covered within the residential landlord tenant ordinance.
Right, and I'm glad that you brought up retaliation, because that's definitely that's what my next question was going to be. But what would be an example of retaliation? I know an eviction could be an informal eviction could be, you mentioned, a form of retaliation, but are there any others, or any other things that the landlord could do that can fall into that category?
Yeah, there are, and the ordinance, the Chicago Residential Landlord Tenant Ordinance lists out specific things that qualify as retaliation. And with that, I would say the most common ones is, of course, the informal eviction that we were talking about. But it also could take the form of your landlord trying to raise your rent. Um, and remember, if you have a year-long lease, your rent amount should be locked in during the term of your lease. But many of the tenants that we help don't have year-long leases. Instead, it's maybe an oral lease or a month-to-month lease. And maybe if your landlord is retaliating, you might see that they suddenly try to increase the amount of your rent, and that very well could be retaliation under the statute. So that's something to keep an eye out for. Certainly, there's other things that we see much less frequently, but tenants have experienced sexual harassment, for example, that very easily could be a form of retaliation, and certainly illegal. So, there's lots of different things that your landlord might try to do to retaliate. It could be as simple as, I don't know, trying to remove access to your washer and dryer, or doing anything that's really designed to take away some sort of service that you had, or an amenity in your lease, or something like that, and pulling that away. And so that all could be retaliation. And when it's done with the intent to get you to give up possession of your apartment and get you to move, that's where that often can cross into a lockout kind of situation as well. So, like I said, they're often hand in hand, but they are separate things that the landlord's not allowed to do.
Definitely. And I do want to add, if you're watching on Facebook, I did put the link to renovention.com in the comment section of the video. So if you want to inquire about Know Your Rights, or if you're having any issues or housing concerns, please go to Renovention. You could definitely be assisted there. And so then kind of just a follow-up question to that, Morgan, would be, is there anything different that a tenant would have to do if they're experiencing retaliation, as opposed to an informal eviction?
Good question. So, informal eviction, what you're going to do depends a little bit about what the circumstances are. So, for example, if your landlord is trying to informally evict you by simply like telling you that you have to leave by a certain date, just knowing your rights can be really beneficial there, because you'll know, like we just talked about, that the sheriff is the only one that can actually remove you from the property. So, if the informal eviction is more of the landlord trying to coerce you into leaving, being aware of your rights, can be really helpful. And that is why we really encourage you to talk to an attorney about your specific situation, so that you can know exactly how that law applies to you. Because what we're talking about today is just general legal information for tenants in Chicago. But if you're a tenant and you don't live in the city of Chicago, please be aware that the things that I'm talking about might not specifically apply to you. And there's also exceptions within the Chicago Residential Landlord Tenant Ordinance that we are talking about, where not all tenants qualify. So, just because you heard it from me, please don't necessarily act on that right now without talking to an attorney and getting advice that's specific to your legal circumstance. But if you're, generally speaking, if you're worried about retaliation, one of the best things that you can do is just to make sure that you are gathering documentation about what's going on. So if you typically communicate with your landlord verbally, but you are worried that your landlord might be retaliating, or you've done something to make a complaint or something like that, that you think that the situation could be escalating in some way, I would really encourage most tenants to kind of switch the mode of communication to be in writing, so that they have a record of everything, that their landlord has said to them, and that they've said to the landlord. So that can help a lot. Making sure to document things by taking photographs or video, if that is important to your case. So think about whatever claims you might be making down the road, and try to think about, how is it that I can best document that. So maybe that means also taking detailed notes. So if you have a phone conversation with your landlord, you could always follow up with a writing and say something like, as we discussed today, here were the things we talked about. Let me know if any of that's not how you understood the conversation to be, but somehow taking that oral conversation and figuring out how to kind of memorialize it into something that's verifiable later.
And I do want to add, we are talking about the RLTO quite a bit in this video. We have a previous Tenant Thursday video talking about that, that you could definitely find if you go to LCBH's page and then click videos and then go into the Tenant Thursday video series. I'll also add the link into the comment section. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate. Go ahead and type them into the comment section of this video. That way we can go ahead and ask them to Morgan. And then my last question here, Morgan, would be, can a tenant initiate legal action against a landlord if they experience any, whether it's retaliation or an informal eviction?
Yes, you can. You certainly can. Talk to an attorney because they'll be able to help you understand what types of claims that you might have and the likelihood of success on those claims. You can come to our intervention. We can try to get you some more information. But there are also private attorneys that are often willing to take these cases, especially with respect to retaliation, because the residential landlord tenant ordinance that we were talking about has a fee shifting provision in it. So those attorneys could actually be paid by your landlord if they're able to successfully, prove your case. So please, consider talking to an attorney if you think that you're experiencing retaliation, because you very well might be able to get representation and get somebody to really jump in and help with your case, whether that's going through intervention or talking to another attorney. Seek out that assistance because it really can be a benefit to you. And if I can just add, Alex, I think this is a really timely topic because as we've been seeing, and you might know if you've been watching other Tenant Thursdays, we've got an eviction moratorium in place right now. So landlords generally should not, in Illinois, I should say, should not be able to be filing most eviction cases through at least August 22nd. And maybe it's going to be extended longer than that. But even once a landlord files cases, we're seeing some cases that are being filed that aren't having dates set through into 2021. And so landlords are getting antsy. And if maybe you're behind in rent and you want to try to work something out with your landlord, there's ways to do that and to try to move the conversation forward. But many landlords are starting to think that the formal eviction process is just not going to move as quickly as they want. And so even though it's illegal, I think, we're concerned that we're going to start to see an increase in the number of people that are experiencing these informal evictions. So it's a very timely topic. Thank you for, thinking to talk about it today. And please be aware, that there's not a huge hurry. If your landlord is trying to convince you that you have to leave, in 2 weeks or something like that, there's a good chance that that's not true. So talk to an attorney, try to get a plan in place and use that, not to say, don't pay your rent or anything like that, but use that knowledge so that you can try to work out a settlement agreement that's going to be best for everyone, so that you can try to figure out a solution that works for you, works for the landlord, and hopefully really prevents the landlord from actually going forward and filing an eviction case. So if there's a way to work something out to try to prevent yourself from being locked out, try to prevent that retaliation, and otherwise move the conversation forward, that can have a really big impact.
Definitely. Thank you for all that information, Morgan. And I do want to take the time to say that if you're watching this video after the live stream, whether it's today, tomorrow, or in a week, please go ahead and put any questions or comments you may have into the comment section. I do watch these videos or the comment section to these videos every day to monitor and make sure that we can get back and respond to any questions and concerns. I'll also link the previous RLTO video and any other relevant information into the comment section and add it in the description so you have quick access to that information as well. I'm gonna give it a couple of seconds, see if any other questions come in. But with that, thank you so much for taking the time out of your day to talk about such a timely and important topic, Morgan.
Thanks, Alex.
Definitely. And it looks like there isn't any questions coming in. So I do want to say thank you for the people that watched the video. If you're watching offline, definitely go ahead and comment and add any questions. With that, we are on every Thursday at 6 p.m. For Tenant Thursdays. So you can always tune in for the next video at 6 p.m. Thank you so much. Have a good night.